This is going to be strange. This is going to be very strange.
First time for everything.
It's okay. Okay. No, you're the high internet guy. You say high internet.
Okay, that makes you.
Okay.
Yep.
3, 2, 1.
Hi, Internet.
Hey! So, we're doing something a little different today.
That we are.
Yeah, way out of our elements. Used to either doing bat reps or scripted stuff.
Yeah, and today we're going to chat to you with our faces, which is strange.
Yeah, I am actually not an orc, although someone might disagree.
He's less green than normal today.
Just a bit. So today we're bringing this to you in partnership with Kill Team University. It's a really great Discord run by a couple guys, Pajama and Ted. They pulled together a Discord that kind of resonated a little bit with us as far as bringing the community together in a positive way to learn and teach this game, and also everyone get better by playing with each other.
Yeah.
Not in that way.
No, it's a great learning resource. If you're new to the hobby, it's a great place to go and learn. They've a lot of people who are willing to answer questions. If you're experienced in the hobby and have some time and ability to help people learn, I recommend you go over there too, so you can kind of take on more of the coaching and advising roles. Because the more people we get into this hobby, the better.
Yeah, 100%. And we'll have our chat hosted over there for this event and all future live events. If this actually doesn't implode and get set on fire and we do this again, then we'll be doing our future chats there as well. So if you take a look down below in the description, you'll get a link to their Discord. So hop in there, and there's a Cogboy Cogitations app. So just go and join the fun. With that said, let's start talking about this. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
So. If you didn't read the description or the title and all you saw is RA versus RAI, it's probably helpful to define that if you're not familiar with those terms. So RAW stands for Rules as Written versus Rules as Intended, RAI. And on the surface, it seems pretty simple, like homebrew versus what it says in the book, but it's very much not that simple, especially with Kill Team.
Yeah. So just to elaborate a little more for the newer players. So Rules as Written is literally as it sounds. It's the way the rules are written in the books, interpreting them very, very literally, exactly the way that you lift them off the page. Rules as Intended is where things get a little more interesting, a little more dicey. Yeah, I did that intentionally. So Rules as Intended is where we're, as players, we have to read in between the lines and kind of think critically about what we think it is that the game designers wanted, what they intended for the rules to accomplish when writing them. Yeah. And because, as with any complex game, there will be moments where we have points where two rules come and have a head-on collision, and you're not really sure what the proper way to interpret things is.
And of particular importance to Kill Team, our rules are far from perfect.
Yes.
A lot of it is either copy-paste from 8th edition and maybe a little bit from 9th edition. And some strange interactions and a lot of reading the tea leaves and trying to figure out what GW wanted us to do in certain situations. It's unfortunate for anyone who's familiar with D&D. There's a resource called Sage Advice, which honestly is just a collection of Twitter responses from the developers, mostly from, I think it's from Chris Perkins.
You would know better than I would.
Yeah, no, it's not Chris Perkins. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Mostly from one of the core game designers, kind of clarifying certain rules in D&D, which is much less important than rules clarification for a tabletop game where it's more of a competitive nature than a collaborative thing like D&D. And unfortunately, we don't have stuff like that. So we're often left with the burden of trying to interpret these rules. Some places we actually have a little bit of insight. We have some FAQs and some designer commentaries. You can see a couple of those. We'll pull them up on the screen. This is probably the most referenced one. This is the official RADA from the core manual that is available on their website. And just kind of skimming through this, you could see the magenta ones are the ones that are more recent. But oftentimes you can get some clarifications by looking through here. But even more important than this would be the designer's commentary, which is quite literally their FAQ. This is a great, valuable resource that we have in this community, but unfortunately, it's not very often updated. No. Not at all. I think we've had 2 updates over the past 2 years.
Yeah, and I just noticed as you pulled up the core FAQ, the date on that is August 2019. Yeah, it hasn't seen a lot of love in a while, despite the fact that there are many questions that continue to be ongoing.
Many questions.
But that just sort of reinforces the importance of us as a community being able to go through and interpret rules intelligently and in what am I trying to say? Intelligently and in good faith.
That's a good point.
Because it's very easy to hit a point, not even intentionally, where you're interpreting a rule in a way that's beneficial to yourself. Not because you're trying to pull anything malicious, just because...
I mean, everyone has their bias.
Yeah, like if a rule, comes down to a 50-50, there's genuinely not a good way to interpret it. It's very easy to just assume that it works the way that's best for you and not even realize that you're doing so.
And one little thing I want to dovetail on the end of that before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of this is if anyone follows Tabletop Minions on YouTube, this week he actually had a video that was interestingly relevant. He had 3 misconceptions on wargaming, on miniature wargaming. And the first misconception is that the competitive scene is the dominant scene and everyone should be up to date on that. And he disagreed with that, and I disagree with him disagreeing on that. Respectfully, because the point he said is that most people aren't playing in shops, they're playing with friends, and they're playing and they're not playing competitively, and that's 100% true. But he also said you don't have to worry about being up to date, playing the most up to date rules, and getting everything right, because you're just playing with your friends, and that's fine. And while there's a shade of truth to that, there's also a kind of a social contract and an expectation when you come to a table that rules are going to interact in a way that's predictable because you're coming with a certain plan, a certain team, a certain objective, a certain win condition. And even if you're playing casually, you're not just throwing dice and saying, oh, whatever happens, happens. You're trying to accomplish a goal. You're playing a game, it's competitive, it's winning, but it's in a fun, chill environment. That's really the only difference between playing in a tournament and playing with fun. You're still playing a game to win. So there still has to be some sort of kind of understanding of how to play the rules correctly, especially if you're going to be engaging in casual games at your game store now that things are opening up again. You're going to be playing with someone you never played before, and you can't... It's like someone coming over to your house and you're asking, it's like, oh, can you pass a potato, when that's just what you call water in your house. Like, the other person's not going to know what the heck you're talking about. So you need to have that shared language, and that's what a lot of what we're going to be going into today is kind of developing that shared language and developing a very easy way to solve these kind of weird interactions.
Right. Should we jump into the proper order of reference for things? Is that the next part? Okay. So the first thing you're going to run into when you're reading and interpreting rules is one of the rule books. That is, so we'll call that sort of your baseline. There are, basically every rule you're going to need is in here. I'm not saying that every rule in it is well written or doesn't conflict with anything, hence the whole point of this video.
There's words and grammar in these books.
There are words with meaning, and they are organized in a loose grammatical sense. And the looseness of those grammar and the not great definitions of those words lead us into complications. So core rule books, not core rule books, rule books, which is the core manual, elites, various other various other sort of expansion type things. Those are your baseline. And that's where the problem comes in, because the baseline has conflicts.
Yeah, a lot of conflicts and a lot of holes in them. If a little bit of this seems confusing how we jump around, we have a few examples that we kind of highlighted that we want to kind of go through to kind of attack some of these more convoluted interactions, just so a lot of this is more relevant. But to tie this all back to the main point, rules as written versus rules as intended, when you go into these books, oftentimes you'll encounter rules where, as you're trying to decipher how it's written, it's not always clear, and you're having to try and figure out rules as intended to try and figure out the most fair way to execute those rules in those interactions. But after looking at these core books, there's also the errata, which we flashed up before, the errata and the designer's commentary, which would take precedent over whatever's in the book. A good place to look for whenever you have a question is honestly the first place is the designer's commentary. This, more often than not, I think, will take precedent even over tournament FAQs, just because this is the official word from Games Workshop.
Yeah, and to interject for someone who's watching this who's just a complete novice and you're not up to date on the way all this works. So if you have your core rule book, so what we're referencing, this FAQ and these designers' commentaries, they are literal changes that they are making to the book to explain the ways that they essentially messed up or failed to make something perfectly clear. So when you're reading these are an overwrite or an clarification to what is in those core rulebooks. So that's why this supersedes what's in the core rulebooks, because it literally is or expanding or overriding them.
Yeah, and one simple question that I see time and time again that typically comes up is mortal wounds from a sniper rifle or rail rifle. The big shooting gun. What the fish use. Tip to talking orky, just put what anywhere in the sentence. It sounds perfect. When you actually resolve that mortal wound, and I believe, if we can find it real quickly, if I can't find it quickly, then we will just... I think it's under the Tau section, if I remember correctly. I have snipped this time and time again to help people out. Yeah. Fill the time.
I'm just going to dance. I'm no good at this.
Well, either way, how that resolves is specifically answered in here. It's not a rewrite of any of the rules. It's not a change in how the rule is actually executed. It's just a clarification. And then another one, again with Tau, this oftentimes comes up, is modifiers for drone using savior protocols and who rolls the role for savior protocols, all that kind of stuff. All those clarifications oftentimes are in here. So what I typically encourage most players, experienced or newer, if you have a question, check out this first and just see if it's already answered by the powers that be at GW proper. And if it's answered, great, because it's oftentimes not going to be overwritten. Don't get me started about metabolic overdrive, because that breaks the rule that I just gave you. That's flip-flopped a few times.
We're trying to help bring people in, not scare them away.
Okay, well, let's pretend that doesn't exist. Yes. Let's get away from
that. But yeah, so now what we've just showed and discussed is the official Games Workshop FAQ and designer's commentary. So those get layered on top of the core books, the books. Now, when you start to talk about non-Games Workshop events, non-Games Workshop packets, then you start to come into FAQs designed by the packet writers or community members. And these come in sort of as a side or to the side or slightly below the core books in terms of order of importance. They're still very important. However, they add to what's there rather than overwrite, or I guess we were saying add before, but they add to they add to what we already have, and they sort of patch up the holes that the community has known existed in the rules for a while.
Yeah, it's kind of that living FAQ that we kind of wish we had. Like you have places like I think Atomic Mass Games with Asmodee, who just took over for Legion. Part of their big thing that they announced was we have a living FAQ that's going to be updated like that. And that's essentially what a lot of these TOs have been doing, kind of giving us that living FAQ, and I'll showcase that in a little bit. We have that somewhere.
We for example, we're West Coast US players, so we're buddies with Kill Team Stream, and he has just a phenomenal living FAQ.
I can pull that up right now.
Oh, look at that. Yeah. It's almost like we planned it. But yeah, so Sheldon, Kill Team Stream, he's put together a fantastic living FAQ. He updates regularly whenever questions come up.
Yeah, this is just the PDF that he has sourced, but he, let me see if I can get this into frame without breaking everything. I might have broken everything. Let's see, what does it look like? Oh, wow, that's actually fairly well centered. Hey, I might have to shrink this though. Oh yeah, so on his website, which is just killteamstream.com.faq, he actually has all this stuff nicely kind of put here, but he also has this living FAQ that you can kind of scroll through. Let me see if I could shrink that down a little bit to get into frame. That you can kind of scroll through, that he updates a little bit more regularly than that PDF that I have. But it has all these questions, and you could just Control F and look through this. This is honestly a good place to look as well after you've looked at the main designer commentary that we showcased just a moment ago, because this kind of adds to that. And not all tournaments, there's a lot of tournaments that have their own FAQs, and TOs are always going to have their own FAQs, and they're very much entitled to that. But there's a lot of tournaments internationally that will actually use this FAQ, given how fairly concise it is, and separates things out for secondaries that he has in his packets, different tactics and how they interact. It's actually pretty well organized. Another good place to kind of look to try and get some more insight into how rules interact and how they're resolved. But the thing about this FAQ is that this bridges the gap between rules as written and rules as intended, because what Sheldon and in talking with the community has had to do with this tournament FAQ is to try and interpret what GW actually wants us to do. Everything that we talked up to now, this designer's commentary, the core manuals, the designer commentary here, all these errata, this is all rules as written, and this is all what they say, how it goes. And whenever this is not enough, we actually have to bridge into either interpretation of rules as written or even getting to rules as intended, which will make more sense once we actually talk about the examples where rules as intended is pretty much the way that we have to go. But what happens if none of these have an answer?
If none of these have an answer, and you're playing, so let's say you're playing at a tournament, at an event. You've looked at the rules as written, you don't have an answer. You've looked through a tournament FAQ, you've got nothing, you've got no guidance there. So what we recommend at that point is, if there's a tournament organizer or an event organizer of some sort, you call them over, and there is never, and we want to reiterate this if you're ever going to things, there's never any stigma in calling over an organizer for a rules clarification. That is their job as an organizer, and it is completely appropriate if you and your opponent can't come to a conclusion about what the way things should be. Come over a neutral third party, ask for a ruling, you live by it, and you keep playing. But yeah, so you can call over a tournament organizer and say, hey, this is the situation we've got. We don't know what to do. And they'll make up a judgment on the spot to the best of their knowledge of the game, and you keep going.
And you go with it. And worst comes to worst, you roll off.
Yep, and now we're back to rules as written, because that's actually in the book.
Yeah, and that's one of the first rules to kind of solve this discrepancies. It's kind of like this blanket patchwork that they have. It's like, if you can't figure it out, just roll it off, just because there's going to be holes in their own rules. You like starting off with that, because oftentimes you can actually get to an answer somewhere.
Yeah, it's always more satisfactory to come to a conclusion based on some sort of logic.
Yeah. Sometimes that's hard to do on the spot, though.
But it can be hard to do.
So let's get into some examples.
You handle the first one. I'm going to flip through the chat and look at the questions that have come up.
So, first example, this is actually a pretty hot topic, divided by countries and continents, actually. A lot of the Spanish players will disagree with the North American players on how this is resolved, but it's the veteran move and what you're allowed to do after making a veteran move. So just to pull that up on the screen so that way we're all on the same page here, irrespective of your own personal knowledge. The veteran move is this tactic right here called adaptive tactics. And this tactic basically reads that before the initiative phase, so before any battle round, you can pick a veteran specialist from your kill team and they can make a normal move or an advance. Those are their only two options. Pretty straightforward. But where the interaction comes into play, if we go to the movement phase and read charge, and we read charging, they cannot have had, I think it's actually in the advance. A model that advances cannot charge. So it's very explicit right here. A model that advances cannot charge in this battle round. We're actually in that battle round. So this little sentence right here is what causes the big bugaboo with the adaptive tactics, because if you were, for example, to advance, then that happens before the battle round, and then you want to charge as part of that model's movement within the battle round. Everyone agrees that model can move again because they moved before the battle round started, so it's a whole new battle round, so they can move again. But there is disagreement on whether you can charge or not. In North America and most of the tournaments here, it's ruled that you can charge because that advance happened before the battle round, so everything erases, and then you start over with initiative phase and then movement phase, and that advance happened before any of that. So before the battle round starts, that's how you proceed. But others will highlight this ruling right here, this sentence right here, and rule that a model that advances cannot charge. Why would they put this here if they weren't trying to talk about the veteran tactic? So this is where rules as written has no answer. And then the next
before we move on to that, I actually had an answer to this before we received any sort of clarification, which is what Emmanuel's about to go to, I believe.
Well, don't make me look bad. Just say it.
So,
and then I'll agree with you. Yes, that's where I was going to go.
So a little bit of historical context here. Kill Team came out at the same time as 8th edition Warhammer, and we're fairly certain that they copy-pasted large sections of the rules here. And in Kill Team, charging happens in the movement phase along with all other types of movement. But in Big Hammer, the charge phase and the movement phase are actually two separate things. Yeah. So in Big Hammer, it makes sense for them to declare that a model which advances cannot charge.
Because there's special rules that allow them, like the Orc rules with the War Boss that lets them charge after an advance. That's not where I was going to go. I'll fess up.
Okay. Yeah. But so in that context, if we're assuming that, maybe a little copy editor might have been a little lazy, and rather than writing everything from scratch, they copy-pasted, which is perfectly sensible. They missed this.
Well, they did the first part. They did the copy. They didn't do the editing.
Yeah, they didn't do the editing part. But so for me, I read this sentence and I say, okay, like this. That's where this came from. Rules. My interpretation is that rules as intended, that cannot charge shouldn't exist. It doesn't make sense in the context of Kill Team, unless you are referring very specifically to the advance and charge available to a veteran. And I don't think, given the nature of rules inconsistencies available all over this book, that they specifically targeted that one interaction with this one word. I don't buy that.
Yeah, it's assuming a certain level of awareness about the interactions, which we don't really see with other interactions. So why would this specifically be an interaction they would be aware of and highlight. So yeah, and we obviously agree because that's how we play and that's how we've always played. And when we heard this alternative, the alternative argument is a valid argument that we just don't agree with.
Yes,
but
in fact, it's the rules as written argument, to be completely fair.
Yeah, but this is where rules as intended comes into play. If you look in the errata in the commentary, it doesn't come up. So how would you resolve this if you're having an interaction? Well, you either talk about it, which is going to take way too much time.
I thought it did ultimately come up in the designer's commentary.
Does it? I don't remember that.
Control F charge for me.
Control F charge. Charge. No, fall back. You were mistaken, my good friend. Yeah. No, but where it does come up is actually in the Kill Team Stream FAQ.
That must be what I'm thinking
That's
of.
probably what you're thinking of. And this is why having an FAQ that you can rely on, and if you agree with your opponent that, hey, let's use this tournament FAQ just for our casual games, it's actually really helpful to have an asset like this, because then you could easily have a resource that you can both agree at the head of time, hey, let's use this. So that way there's all these rules clarifications can kind of be resolved. But that's where this is kind of born of. For these specific interactions like the one that we're highlighting right here. If you were playing in Spain, it would be a different rule.
Yep.
So it's always important to refer to whatever packet you're using, probably use the FAQ from that packet. If you're playing a casual game, either have a discussion with whoever you're playing with or have an agreement to use one of these ancillary FAQs, these supplemental FAQs to help smooth these kind of things out. Or just have a debate if you really want to, but I'd rather roll dice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything more to say about the veteran move? I think that highlights pretty perfectly the whole rules as written until that fails, and then you have to do your best to kind of read the tea leaves as far as what GW wants.
Yeah. Speaking of rolling dice, I'll tee you up for yours.
Okay.
So the next thing we're going to look at is Evil Sun's Orcs, his babies, and the interaction of the rules with the charge bonus they got for their sub-faction in Elites.
Yeah. So let's walk through this a little bit. So if we go to Orcs, let's go to the boy. They have this rule. Here we go. Reroll failed charge rolls for a model with this ability. Now, this is fine, as it is in the normal book. And in the core book, we have the rule that rerolls happen before modifiers are applied.
Yes, that's the key thing right there.
So before anything more got introduced to the game, that really wasn't an issue, because if you...
Did the tactic Wa come in the original?
I don't know, actually. I don't know. Let's see if it's right here.
Doesn't look like it.
No, I think that came in either one of their later boxes or in Elites.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't here in the original one, but there was no way to modify this, so reroll failed charge rolls, fine, done. But once we skip over to Elites, it gets a little bit more complicated, because you can actually get yourself into a situation if you run as Evil Sons, which is a very popular...
Reduce the zoom a bit.
Oh yeah, there we go. Thank you. Ta-da. So, Evil Sons, bottom of the page, wrapping around up to here. Add 1 to the move characteristic, that's fine. Add 1 to the advance, that's fine, but add 1 to charge rolls. So you could theoretically be successful in a charge, rolling a 7 when you needed an 8, but you have the +1 from here. But you would be forced to reroll, because reroll failed charge rolls. There's no wiggle room here. You'd be forced to reroll out of a technical success, because the reroll has to happen before the modifier is applied. There's a couple other instances where this happens. Go ahead.
So the reason he says you have to is because if you're not familiar with the whole breadth of rules, okay, cool.
Yeah. So you're forced to reroll it in this situation, and that is rules as written. 100% rules as written. If I roll a 7 and I needed an 8, but I'm Evil Sun, so I got that +1, I would have to reroll that 7 and hopefully get another 7 or higher, right? Which statistically, it's reasonable, but also leaves some bad feels when the whole reason you take Evil Sons is to help get that +1 to make your successes a little bit easier. So the reason why this starts to become a debate is rules as written, ironclad, but rules as intended doesn't seem to be the case, because you can look at other sub-factions. If you look to, I think it's Black Templars. Let me get to them. chapter tactics. I think they're on the second page. Yeah, here we go. You can reroll charges. So an instance right here where we see you can reroll charge rolls for models on your kill team, giving you the option to reroll or not. Now, I'm not very familiar with all of the tactics with Space Marines, so I'm not sure if they can get a modifier to increase their charge. But I think, does medic give you an extra inch on your charge?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's one situation. Well, maybe. Well, we might be wrong with that. Hey, let's find out. Let's find out if we're liars. Are you a liar? I don't know if I'm a liar. Let's find out if we're liars.
I believe that medic is +1 attack and charge.
Yeah, +1 charge. Yeah, we're right.
Yeah.
So that's a situation where you could roll into a fail, but you can reroll charge. So if you roll that 7 when you needed an 8, but they were stim shotted so they can actually make it in, you have the option to say, okay, I take the fail. Oh, look, my modifier makes it a success.
Hooray!
Yay, hooray, let's go beat some Xenos. But, God, I felt dirty saying that. But I digress. So this is an instance where we see, okay, well, they're intending to allow for you to have the option to reroll to kind of help work around that. And then further down, there's another example of this with Hive Fleets. And then you have Behemoth. You can reroll charge rolls. So there's a little bit of consistency in this ruling. Now this is for a sub-faction where the other one is a unit rule. But then if you go even one layer deeper and look at the 9th edition rules for orcs, they change the wording to allow for the can. So here we have a clear example. Long story short. Here you have a clear example of rules as written. You have to reroll a successful charge if it's your sub-faction's modifier that made it successful. But rules as intended, it seems that wasn't the case, especially with the timing of the rule, etc., etc.
Right.
So if you just go by rules as written, yeah, Evil Sons kind of starts to sound a little sour, but any tournament organizer that I know of...
Sour in an edge case, but one that comes up.
It's a big reason why you take that over something like a Death Skull, so it makes it really hard to deal with that. But looking at this is where these FAQs come into line. Evil Sons... Nope, I think it's on his actual website.
Well, I think because you spelled it with an S. Oh,
I might have. Evil. Yeah, he might not have it updated yet, but ruling from Sheldon on this is that the modifiers come into play before the reroll, and he actually has changing you can reroll. So this is an instance where rules as intended actually is being overwritten in the larger community just because it's clear that there was a mistake in the book, but we just don't have an FAQ to adjust for that. So that's another example of how messy all these rules get. And I think, do you want to tackle their next example?
Yeah, sure. So the next thing we're going to discuss is... So specifically, we're going to use witches from Drukhari as an example. So witches have a 4+ invulnerable specifically in the fight phase. Now, that's fairly straightforward. There's nothing crazy about there. Sometimes people will have an initial question of like, hey, someone's shooting them with a pistol in melee.
And it's this rule right here, dodge.
You say, well, wait, and a lot of people will be like, oh, so I've got the 4+ invulnerable save. You go check the rules. No, that one's actually pretty clear. It's specifically in the fight phase. You have your invulnerable save. Great, doesn't apply to the pistol. Now we get to guard, and things get messy. Because we're going to have a guard model who's in combat in the movement phase with a witch. They are going to use fixed bayonets, and they are going to fight. So, fixed bayonets lets you fight as if it's the fight phase. But we're fighting... Or wait, no, it's shooting phase that you're doing this, right?
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
So you're fighting as if it were the fight phase, but you're in the shooting phase. So now comes this question of, does the witch get her 4+ invulnerable save in this moment? And frankly... I could argue this, I think, in genuinely good faith either way.
Yeah,
same. It's not at all a obvious ruling which way it should go.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree on this. You could argue with that, well, clearly it's not the fight phase. They don't get it. That's rules as written? Maybe.
But
maybe. But rules as intended, it doesn't seem necessary. They're not going to be standing there static, just letting them get punched. They're going to dodge, as a rule is. So rules as intended and the fluff and all that kind of stuff makes that ruling seem weird. If you go to the core manual and you look at, oops, I was already in the core manual, and you go to the fight phase, where is it? Fight phase. And you look at the fight sequence includes the enemy making a saving throw as part of the fight sequence. So if you then go look at Astra Militarum,
A little lower down.
There we go. And you look at their fixed bayonets wording. Here it is. Fixed bayonets, and hopefully this might be too small for the stream, but I'll read it out. This order can be issued to model within 1 inch of an enemy model. Order model immediately fights as if it were the fight phase. So they're fighting as if it were the fight phase, and part of their fight activation means their enemy makes a saving throw. So if that fight activation, that shell of that activation, this activation, all these steps that we outlined in the fight phase here, if those are happening as if they're in the fight phase, then enemy making saving throw is happening as part of this, as if it were in the fight phase. Now, this is a way that you can interpret the rules that coincides with how we think this should work.
Yep.
And then you look at 9th, and you look at the rules in 9th edition Warhammer, and that's how it works for witches there whenever they're in melee combat. I think the wording's changed because there's no fight phase, technically, I don't think. Well,
there is.
They're kind of. It's in melee combat. I think the wording has changed there. You can kind of work around the rules as intended, which is why I kind of said kind of rules as written. Rules as written you can't, but then you can also can. So this is something that's just super hotly debated. I remember pages and pages of text threads in Discord on this specific thing, but this is just another illustration of how rules as written, rules as intended can get pretty fuzzy, which is why going to a tournament FAQ usually is a good way just to have an agreement beforehand with a game, because I know in Kill2Stream's FAQ, he makes a calling on this. It might not be updated yet because this is pretty recent, but he makes a calling on this that they do get their, if they're being attacked with melee, they get their dodge ability.
Yeah.
Not with shooting, just with melee. So pistols don't count, but melee attacks do, which kind of helps out with all these scenarios.
Yeah. And I think that it's this one particular example I think is just about the perfect example of how to really, really kind of sit through and think about it and come up to an answer with something that is just as fuzzy as it gets.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to reiterate, a lot of these examples, we're not using these examples to teach people how to interpret these rules. Let me rephrase. Well, we're not using these examples to say this is how you resolve this example. That's not the purpose of this. The point of this is to illustrate how convoluted the rules are and how this rules as written, rules as intended, blurriness really is, and what the best way to kind of go about things are. Long story short, agree on a tournament FAQ to use, but long story long, i.e. this video, you kind of have to just parse through the books and parse through all the different stuff to see how everything's connected and then make the best judgment that you can. We have one example of that, and then I think we can take some questions that we have from the chat, and then we'll probably wrap up, right?
Sounds good.
So we recently had a game. Well, we had 2 tandem games. We were playing with some friends, and we had 2 tandem games, and we're using commanders, and an interaction came up with Enforced Will. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So I was running Eisenhorn, who has the psychic power Enforced Will. If you're not familiar with this, it's a fairly difficult one to pull off. It has a warp charge of 8. But if I successfully do it, I pick an enemy model within 12 inches of Eisenhorn, invisible to him. I essentially take that model over. I can shoot with it as if it were the shooting phase, and that's my model, or I can fight with it as if it's the fight phase and it's my model. Now, so what I tried to do, it got crazy complicated. I was playing Eldar.
Versus Eldar.
I was playing versus Eldar.
Were you playing versus Orcs?
No, this one was playing versus Eldar because I initially went to use the shooting and I tried to take over a heavy weapons platform, and we had the realization. This is a simple one that we solved first, was that I couldn't actually shoot the heavy weapons platform because I didn't have a guardian to shoot it with.
That's pretty funny.
We're like, oh wait,
I didn't know about that.
Yeah,
That's
I was like,
funny.
okay. So then what we did...
You psychically took over a machine. That makes so much sense from AdMech.
Yeah. And then, so what happened was I went to take someone over and fight as if it were the fight phase. And I picked a model that was hanging out in the open. Mm-hmm. It had not charged. It was not charged by anyone. It was just hanging out there. And I said, I'm going to fight with this model because I wanted to use the pile-in move mm-hmm. to shunt it 3 inches around a corner so it wouldn't be able to shoot me. Mm-hmm. And Emmanuel pipes up from the other table and says, well, wait, you can't do that.
Yeah. And the reason why... And then we talked about, we had mm-hmm. a discussion, but we all agree to use the Kill Team Stream FAQ. Mm-hmm. That's what we use in our play group, as that's the majority of tournaments that we actually go to. And in that scenario, the up and atom tactic, which is a combat tactic, which I can pull up over here, mm-hmm. allows you to fight as if it were the fight phase. But the ruling in the FAQ for Kill Team Stream is that you can activate and you can activate and fight. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I'm pulling it up, just to make sure I get the word.
Yeah, you were still on guard.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, so after attacking with another model, your combat specialist has not attacked, it can immediately fight with them. The ruling in the Kill Team Stream FAQ, which is used for a lot of the tournaments that we go to, says that you cannot activate a combat specialist with this tactic if they weren't already eligible to fight.
Right. And that, in and of itself, was a whole rules as written versus rules intended debate. We're not going to get into that here. But it was...
The final ruling is that you cannot activate and pile in and then fight. You have to actually be eligible to fight at the beginning of the fight phase. Or not at the beginning, in the fight phase. You have to already be eligible in order to use this tactic. So we use that as a basis to make this calling for enforced will because it seemed very similar.
Yeah. So we looked at it. We said, while it is two separate rules, one's a stratagem, one's a psychic power. The way it's worded is very similar. It just made sense for us that any limitations applied to one would apply to the other, even though there was nothing in the FAQ about enforced will. And just it was the sensible call to make. We despite having no guidance, we're like, this is the best thing we can do, and that's I think acting in good faith when it comes to rules as intended.
Because you wanted to.
Yeah, I really wanted to.
I mean, and then that took all of 30 seconds, and that's only because we've gone through all these exercises and we're very familiar with it, which is why I usually encourage to at least dive into the books whenever you have a question, even if you're fairly certain, just like right now. Even if you're fairly certain on the ruling or the wording, we still went back to the medic tactic just to verify. That's just a habit that we have. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, not only do you get a better grasp of the game, but you also you might learn something, but you also get used to this habit of referencing the rules, and it becomes very quick. So
here you figure out the next thing we're going to take. So in the vein of having these debates with your opponents, when you're with someone in person, you pull out your rule books, you reference them. It's very easy to do. You can both sit there and look at the same page, whether it's a physical page or on an iPad or something. But when we're having these debates, on Discord or wherever, it's very useful to be able to take a picture with your phone of what you're looking at, or a screenshot, a PDF, and then so that way we're all looking and referencing the same thing and not just relying on our memory of a rule as we debate it. Because frankly, as much as you and I have played this game, sometimes when you get into the weeds on these rules discussions, there will be a couple words that we're not quite remembering right that make a world of difference, and being able to screenshot and say, hey everyone, this is what we're talking about, it'll completely make the entire conversation go that much more smoothly.
Yeah.
And if you do have those sorts of questions, come to the Kill Team University Discord. We hang out there. We'd love to go through questions and things that people have. And I know you do all the time.
It's a guilty pleasure of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm addicted to teaching, so.
Yeah. We're there.
Yeah. So I'll probably go through reverse order just because this is the first thing I saw. You were right. They actually... About what? They actually did address it in the commentary, and I had forgotten about that.
The advanced.
The veteran.
Okay.
And Ted brought it up. There was a great post from I think it was where was it from Marty, where he disagreed with the adaptive tactics plus charge, and he laid out an example. First battle round, it happens at the start of the first battle round, but before the initiative phase, and that's where a lot of these kind of these back and forths happen. But it's actually clearly in the FAQ, and this is an example of where certain groups in certain tournaments will actually disagree. They actually disagree with the FAQ. So in the Spanish scene, I know with Ibericon packet in Spain, which is used for a lot of tournaments such as Freak Wars and others, they have a couple of changes to the rules, especially with line of sight and a lot of stuff like that as well. But they also changed this rule around and call that you cannot charge, even though it explicitly says in the designer FAQ.
If I'm remembering correctly, I think that... is this FAQ or is this the...
Designer commentary.
Designer commentary,
which is the same thing. It's not the errata.
But it's... Wait.
So their designer commentary is essentially their FAQ, but the errata is the only other
Right,
thing.
so... And my apologies to the Spanish players if I'm misremembering how you guys rule this, but I think that their thing was that the errata is very much specifically changes the rules, whereas the designer's commentary is, if we're going to go Pirates of the Caribbean on this, it's more like guidelines than rules. So it's not strictly...
I don't know if I'm on board with that.
Yeah. No, I don't agree with that either,
yeah.
but that is the way, from my understanding, the way they interpret that.
I mean, when we're starved for any interaction with our corporate overlords on how to play with our plastic army men and dice, if they make a call, I think it's pretty fair to go with that. That being said, there are instances where rules as written does get disagreed with.
Yeah.
But this is one of them. And there was there was actually from Ted, he had a question right at the get-go. He asked, where was it? Have you ever encountered a circumstance when a tournament FAQ clearly contradicted GW rules as written? That's one example is the Evil Sons thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because clearly rules as written, you're forced to reroll, but the FAQ says otherwise. Yeah,
and also just so I think a large part of that was in preventing feels bads. I don't think that anyone would argue that rules as intended, clearly that's the way we've ruled it is, or the community has ruled it, clearly that's the way it's supposed to work. There, in no way, shape, or form should an orc who has technically succeeded the charge be forced to have a chance to fail it. That just doesn't make sense.
He might have slipped on some squig oil. It happens.
It happens, but it's...
Oh, I forgot my flashiest chopper. Hang on, I'll be right back.
You giant dork.
Oh, yeah. And then one other question just to highlight, because I think we're hitting our time right now, so we're going to wrap up here shortly. But from X Adventure, from the Kill Team University Discord, he asked us, you keep referring to rules in 9th. Do the rules of 9th transfer to Kill Team? No. Explicitly and 100% no. But they can
rules as written.
Rules as written. But, I mean, even... So, rules as written, none of them matter. Unless they get ported over in another Pariah Nexus, like if we get a Pain and Piety kind of crossover or something like that, then yes. But unless it's explicitly branded as a Kill Team book, completely irrelevant. Except when we have no idea how to resolve an interaction and there's no rules as written interpretation one way or another, or if
there's a conflict.
Or if there's a conflict because you can argue it successfully both ways, you have to look and see what do they expect these models to do? What do they intend these models to do? The rules are not always transferable, but they can help give you some guidance. So, for example, with the orcs, they changed the rule specifically to allow you to choose if you want to re-roll or not with here we go. With the dodge ability of witches, they changed the wording of the rule, I think, to allow any type of melee attack, whether it happens out of phase, to give them their dodge ability. So you look to those as guidelines, but they by no means are proof at all.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not so much that the rules are poor, and I referenced the 8th edition rules earlier when we were discussing the veteran stuff. It's not that in any way, shape, or form that the rules apply. They don't. Kill Team has its own rule set, but it's very much just whenever we're going for rules as intended, we're looking for interpretations, and we do have other rule sets that are parallel to ours, I think is the right way to look at it. And so using them as inspiration and guidance for interpretation, I think, is completely valid.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think that's it.
Do you have any last secondary things?
I think those are the ones that stood out to me, yeah.
Okay.
Well, thanks for joining us. Hopefully this wasn't a dumpster fire.
Yeah,
and hopefully you enjoyed it. And hopefully more soon.
Yeah. See y'all.
Bye.